Hello, everyone, and welcome to what will be an exciting panel discussion about the future of innovation. My name is Triska Hamid. I'm the editor at Wamda. And to start off, we have Andrew Macadam, Global Field Lead for Microsoft for Startups. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself properly?
Thank you very much, Triska. My name's Andrew. I'm the Global Field Lead at Microsoft for Startups. So I have the pleasure of running the field teams around the world. Microsoft for Startups, what do we do? Very simply, we make these connections between the ability, the capability of Microsoft, the amazing partner network, and ultimately customers, with the idea being, how can we be the ones that enable that opportunity for startups to scale and grow? Innovation's a huge part of that, so I'm really excited today. And to be honest, the thing I love, Triska, about coming onto these panels, I learn as much as I share in these panels. So I'm really excited to hear from the other members today.
That's fantastic. All right, second up, we have Salvatore Lavallo, Head of FDI at Abu Dhabi Investment Office. Hi, Salvatore.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Tell us a little bit about what you do at ADIO.
Yeah, happy to. So the Abu Dhabi Investment Office, we support companies that are looking to either expand into Abu Dhabi or to grow in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. So we look at companies in any sector that are looking to expand, and we help them with non-financial support in order to help them find ways to reduce the barriers of entry and growth in Abu Dhabi, and also through financial support in order to catalyze the investments that they're looking to make in Abu Dhabi.
Fantastic. Thank you. And last but not least, we have Courtney Powell, who's the Chief Operating Officer at 500 Startups. Hi, Courtney.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with these great panelists. My name is Courtney Powell. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of 500 Startups globally. For those of you getting to know 500, we are a global venture capital firm that is invested in over 80 countries now worldwide. Portfolio of about 2,700 startups and I believe 29 unicorns as of this week. And in particular, in my role, I have been focused pretty heavily on MENA over the last year and are looking to expand funds both in MENA and all over the world. So really excited to be here with all of you.
That's great. All right. So my first question is, how have your perceptions of innovation changed over this past year? And I'd like each of you to take a stab at this. Andrew, why don't we start with you? Have your perceptions of innovation changed over the pandemic?
Do you know what? And it's really funny because so often, Triska, I think there's a sort of blurred definition of what innovation really is, and it's really easy to have the ideas, but it's really challenging to execute. And I think what's been fascinating over the last sort of 12, 18 months during the pandemic, the question has been, has it been possible for many companies to actually be able to execute, for these startups that have got these incredible ideas? And I think there's absolutely no doubt that at the start of the pandemic, there was no doubt whatsoever, everything slowed down. What I think has been really interesting, and someone actually equated it recently to the Manhattan Project. It's not only what's actually happened during the last year, it's going to be the impact of what we see probably over the next 10 years or so that we think is going to be absolutely fascinating. So what I would say is, although it was slowed down at the start, I'm anticipating that it's going to rapidly accelerate. And I think we're already starting to see some of these green shoots. I mean, Courtney was just saying a second ago about the number of companies that they've invested in. And I think what we've seen is a huge injection of capital to really start to accelerate these ideas. So although slow at the start, I think we're really starting to see things ramp up and that execution start to happen.
Courtney, has the thesis at 500 Startups changed at all because of the pandemic, or are you guys investing in a similar fashion pre-COVID?
No, certainly the thesis of 500s in terms of our investment theory has not changed. In fact, I think we've been even more aggressive through the pandemic in terms of investing, not only in our typical countries we invest in, but also looking to expand as well. I think maybe from another perspective, you'd asked the previous panelist, whether our perceptions of innovation have changed. And I think, just thinking about founders and all the great companies we get to work with, if anything, it's only crystallized our belief that innovation is the key to unlocking so many ecosystems and economies around the world. So just feel stronger than ever about investing in great talent globally.
And Salvatore, from the governmental point of view, how has innovation been impacted with regards to ADIO and the work that you guys do?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky that every day I get to talk to many innovative companies and companies that are looking at lots of different types of disruptive technologies, and that has continued. I think that the desire and the passion has always been there. A little bit on the execution side, right? We had some troubles in terms of getting visas for people to enter for having companies start up, but we actually signed and announced like over a dozen different investments, a lot in agriculture. We more innovative companies that I've ever really seen. We recently announced with NanoRacks, which is a space agriculture technology company. We have brought AWS some data centers to Abu Dhabi, which was announced a few weeks ago. And so all of these have been kind of cooking in the oven the entire the past few months, but to be able to now see them really come into fruition and those kind of barriers to the execution really being eliminated it's really been fantastic.
Sticking with the government, with regards to innovation, when should the government's role go beyond regulation? Salvatore.
Yeah, so I think that the way that we look at as a government as supporting companies is that we don't want to be a market maker. We don't want to be master planning economies. We're really here to be a catalyzer. So we want companies to come in to see what makes strategic business sense, and then we come in to catalyze that and push it forward. Now, there are often times where that will need to be on the regulatory side, where there are like policy changes that need to be made in order to spur that innovation or to encourage the innovation. But also, I think it's a lot of that funding, enabling it to happen. A lot of my role is really translating between the private sector and the public sector so that the companies understand the government processes and that the government understands the feedback that is coming from the private sector on changes that need to be made in order to spur growth. So I think it will always involve some of that regulation, but it's really about having that dialogue, making sure that feedback is being heard, and then seeing that we're playing a role that is supportive and catalyzing rather than being the kingpin market maker itself.
Andrew, Microsoft is a bit of a behemoth, yet you work with the startups. Going to what Salvatore said about striking the balance between private and public sector partnerships and working together for innovation, how do you strike that balance when it comes to regulations and competition policies to protect startups and new entrants against incumbents like Microsoft?
Oh, wow. Now that feels almost like a loaded question, Triska, because it's really interesting. Like I really enjoyed actually listening to what Salvatore was just saying there with regards to catalyzing. And I think it's a word that I use all the time as well with regards to, if you will, the responsibility of commercial enterprises like Microsoft. And I joined Microsoft 9 years ago. And one of the key reasons that I did was actually, when I look at Microsoft, the success hasn't come directly from Microsoft itself. Well, don't get me wrong, there's been some great product solutions developed, etc. But where I see its true differentiation is in our partner network. In the way that what we've done is we actually use partners for everything we do for the delivery of our solutions, but also about enabling their solutions. So in a way, when we look at startups, one of the things we always look at them as is our partners rather than ever as our competition. And it's really interesting. The number of times I've presented to startups and my mantra is always the same. I always say to them, they are doing things that we will never think of doing. They are developing solutions that we will never develop. We develop for the masses, whereas so often startups are developing these incredible solutions for really specific problems that our customers are facing. So our role is actually more about how do we give them visibility? How do we enable them to actually get access to customers to help accelerate their businesses? And the way obviously that we enable that is through the Azure platform. So absolutely, there's a commercial imperative ultimately around what Microsoft is doing as an organization. But that commercial imperative catalyzes the opportunity for these incredible companies. And in fact, what's going on in the Middle East at the moment with regards to the Highway to 100 Unicorns program in conjunction with Salvatore and the team in ADIO. I think is a great example where what we're trying to do over the next few years is develop hundreds of startups, give them access to customers, and ultimately enable their scale and growth in an environment that catalyzes and also gives visibility to the opportunity in the Middle East.
I mean, another thing that startups need is investment and money. So, Courtney, how have you seen the MENA landscape shape up when it comes to investment in startups? Has it been improving, do you think? What is missing?
Yes, I mean, I think it's been an incredible, really few years in MENA. 500 started investing in this region back in 2012 with the first investment that we did actually over Skype into a Jordanian company. And if you think about the growth that we've seen in the market in terms of just the investment dollars, in 2012, I believe it was less than $100 million. And then, of course, in 2020, we're now looking at over $1 billion in funding. And I really think it's just getting started. Every day I hear about a new fund being created, and really excited to see continued strength of the local investors in the region, as well as other global investors beginning to take notice of MENA and all the fantastic founders that are coming from this region.
Salvatore, whose innovations leads to better economic outcomes? Is it the ones that come from startups, from the incumbents like Microsoft, or governments?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really think it's how are we going to be defining those outcomes, and are we only looking at economic outcomes? And when we look at development, we're not only thinking about an increase in economic indicators, but we're really thinking about an increase in quality of life. How is that then societally specific? How is it culturally specific? And so within the investment office, we really have a lot of different ways that we look at what that impact is. So we look, of course, at some of the quantifiable metrics like the total investment that a company will make, the number of jobs, the number of high-skilled jobs, but we also look on the qualitative side. We look, is this going to disrupt a specific sector? Is this going to lead to a lot of upskilling or like increase in talent? Is this going to have a reputational impact on the region or on Abu Dhabi? Is this going to fit within our ESG policies, which we recently announced? And with that kind of more holistic and nuanced view, then we're able to really see what are the outcomes that we want to get to. How does each company, whether large or small or whatever sector they might be in, how do they contribute to that overall growth and innovation story that we're looking for in Abu Dhabi?
Andrew, do you think that economies can grow without innovation?
Can economies grow without innovation? Look, I mean, history shows that it's all about evolution, isn't it? We evolve in everything that we do. We, whatever happens, I think evolution, ultimately powered by innovation, is critical to what we're doing. Now, we could fall into the trap of then talking about consumerism and going down a really different path. But I think, without a doubt, you can look historically at the way that things have accelerated. You can talk about Moore's law, and you can talk about compute power, and you can look at what's going on in the mobile world with regards to technology and the increase in networks. But ultimately, I guess you're talking to someone. I describe myself as a realist, a pragmatist, and an optimist. We look at what's happened over the last 18 months. And I think without innovation, there is no way that we would have got to the point. Don't get me wrong, I know so many people are still struggling around the world with the challenge of the pandemic at the moment. But we're actually, for the first time, I believe, in many parts of the world, starting to see the shoots of recovery. And a lot of that has actually come about through innovation. It's come about through this rapid transformation. And I think that obviously will tie into an economic aspect. I loved what actually Salvatore was talking about a second ago about the way that ADIO are looking at success and at impact. And sometimes that's actually down to skills and learning and growth in different areas. There's as part of the, anyone that's done an MBA, they might have even seen the happiness index with regards to the, not looking at GDP, but actually looking at the happiness of a country. So what I would say is, to distill it, innovation is absolutely critical for us to continue, I guess, to thrive and survive.
Courtney, what kind of innovations are you seeing now? Are we going to experience a different quality of life, as Andrew just pointed out, from the kind of startups that you're working with now and the pipeline that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just thinking back through the pandemic, one particular portfolio company comes to mind, which is Carbon Health. Carbon Health, I believe the founders were originally from Turkey, and ultimately were a big part of, at least in California and the Western US, being able to stand up new sorts of clinics and new sorts of technologies to be able to get vaccines out to people faster. That's certainly an impact on quality of life. We've been really excited to see startups continuing to focus in areas such as remote work and the future of work, obviously with the pandemic ushering in a new way of living and really thinking. So founders, I think they just do such an incredible job of identifying gaps in the market, and not only in the existing market, but what has been created by this new reality that we all live in. So we're going to continue to look for founders who are exploiting those gaps and creating new companies that are going to benefit society as a whole.
Okay. Salvatore, in your opinion, what do you think is missing from MENA's ecosystem at the moment with regards to innovation? We've got, you know, a government that's very willing in the UAE to invest in innovation. We've got the pipeline of startups. We've got a healthy VC sector. We've got a growing education aspect to it as well, and these are all crucial to enable innovation. Do you think there's anything missing? Can we improve on any part at all?
I think it's really about all the things that you just said and making sure that we're enabling growth in all of them, right? That we are enabling the private sector coming in and really, dictating what the innovation will look like, that we're continuing as a government to make sure that we are supporting that we are making sure there's the funding on the VC side for the early stage, PE for the later stage companies. Also a key point that you mentioned is the education, making sure that we do have a strong workforce that is really focused on research, that we are training a lot of people, training our population here. It's also about how the world is changing and where the centers of power are shifting to, and what role the Middle East can play and what role Abu Dhabi can play within that broader region, and just kind of connecting the world. There are no other countries that you can have as many direct flights to from than the UAE, right? We have more direct flights from our tiny country here than we do from some of the large places in Europe or even China, and that gives amazing access for companies to use Abu Dhabi as a jumping off point. And so I think that what we need to make sure that we do is, as these things continue to change, as like global powers like shifting around, that we stay kind of at the forefront of that we use our soft power skills, that we continue to attract companies, students, and that as a government we make sure that we are not only doing our actions because it's what we've been doing for the past, but that we're always innovating and changing ourselves.
And Triska, do you mind if I add on to that? Because I think it's a really important point. I think it's one of the biggest changes that I've certainly seen in the Middle East over the last number of years, has been this proactivity in connecting this corporate environment, the government actually acting in a really proactive way. And I think there's a massive appetite in business at the moment, not necessarily to look at R&D and innovation in-house, but actually looking at working with these amazing startups, these amazing companies that are developing these solutions, and really the likes of ADIO, enabling that connection with them to accelerate both innovation, but also the adoption within businesses that are actually then funding the work that these startups are doing. So I think it's an absolutely crucial piece of work that's going on at the moment, and an amazing opportunity.
Andrew, I'm going to stick with you because, as Salvatore mentioned, there's a shift in power around the world, and we've seen more technology emerge from other hotspots, innovation hotspots around the world. How is this impacting global technology, and how does this impact innovators around the world?
Yeah, do you know what? It's fascinating because obviously I think even when I first started working with startups almost 10 years ago, and I've probably worked with around 3,000 startups in the last 10 years. And when I first started working with them, everyone was like, how do I get into the US market? It's like, that's where the funding is. That's where all the hot startups are. And what's been amazing actually over the last number of years is you're exactly right, Triska, how that's now spreading. We're seeing, so one of my team, James, based in China, when I look at what's going on in China at the moment with regards to the rapid acceleration of innovation in that market, it is absolutely incredible what's going on. And I think what I'm seeing in Europe as well, so I'm based just outside of Dublin in Ireland, and what I'm seeing in Europe at the moment, and the importance actually of governments in this growth as well is incredible. So when you actually take these sort of specific examples around how certain governments are actually allowing people to essentially take sabbaticals, take time out with guaranteed jobs that they were doing before at the end of it, to move back into those roles, to really catalyze, I'm going to use that word again, Salvatore, catalyze what's going on in those environments. So we're starting to see these, the blurring, the blending across different areas. Don't get me wrong. London, massive. The Valley, massive, obviously. But then we're starting to see these little areas dot around the place. But it happens because of coordinated efforts. The likes of ADIO, Microsoft for Startups, the corporates that we're working with, the partners that we're working with. This is how it all starts. And I think the key advice I always give in these scenarios is it's never too late to start, but you have to start. And that's, as I say, I think what we're really starting to see in the Middle East, and why I'm really excited. Not only am I seeing these trends all around the world, but the work that's going on now in the Middle East to really catalyze this. I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the next 12 to 18 months.
Courtney, do you think the Middle East will be the next one to explode in terms of innovation?
Well, I can tell you from the last year of really learning and benefiting from learning from our portfolio and our co-investors and the Middle East, there is no region that I'm personally more excited about than MENA. I think, just calling back to the discussion with regard to new centers of innovation around the world, just looking at our own portfolio of the, I believe, 29 unicorns now that we have, over half of them are from outside the United States. And that's really a phenomenal, demonstration of how innovation is moving outside of Silicon Valley, outside of London, New York, et cetera, and really, propping up and taking over all around the world. So no doubt that MENA is absolutely, on the J curve, moving straight up, and quite excited to see, the growth that's going to come over the next year.
Salvatore, I'm quite interested in your opinion on this. With the rise of, say, Chinese technology, US technology, we in the region seem to be quite comfortable with both. Do you think we could be that anchor to sort of bring these different technologies together?
Absolutely. I mean, I always say that a company or startup in Abu Dhabi has to be instantly global, right? I mean, we are under no facade of thinking that we are this large market in and of ourselves, but we are a very stable place. We are, the safest country or safest city in the world. We had the #1 response to COVID, as announced a couple of weeks ago in terms of the Oxford ranking. We've had a place to not only do business, but a place for the people to live. And so we're seeing a lot of companies that are looking globally, but are thinking about where can they place their talent. And a lot of with the pandemic and people working remotely, we're now having people say, okay, they have a choice of where do they want to live in the world, and that doesn't have to be linked to where they're working in the world. But also you have companies that do want to be closer to the markets that they're working in, and if they're working quite globally, we have a lot of Chinese companies looking to go west, like using Abu Dhabi as that jumping off point. We also have East Africa growing quite a lot, and a lot of companies within the UAE using Abu Dhabi as that jumping off point. Same with the subcontinent of India, the broader Middle Eastern region. So I really feel like the UAE, the Middle East in general, can really play that kind of that middle role, and working with all the different geographies, and having that high quality of life for people to come and work here and impact the rest of the world from Abu Dhabi.
Andrew, do you think there are any potential risks of focusing too much on innovation? Perhaps societal, perhaps we might be leaving groups behind.
Actually, it's something that we definitely are wrestling with at the moment, because I think what's really interesting for me is when we look at historically the startup industry, and we look at where the investment has gone, and Courtney, forgive me, but when we look at sometimes the investment portfolios, historically, there's been a lot of pattern matching. We look, there are certain things, and I think one of the things we need to be incredibly cognizant of at the moment is the bias. Maybe we really need to start incorporating, really thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to founders, when it comes to catalyzing ecosystems. Again, I'm gonna hold my hands up and say I think that what I'm already seeing, the work that's going on in the Middle East, is exactly what we need to be doing. It's really thinking about earlier stage founders, and it's trying to be it's trying to democratize the way that they're able to access both the technology, the support, etc. But I think we need to be really intentional about the way that we think and start to look at the investment that we're doing and who we're investing in. So from a Microsoft for Startups perspective, we've announced a number of initiatives around social impact and social entrepreneurialism. We've got Annie Parker, who's based out of Sydney, who's really running our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs as well. So really focused on, we talk about gender. Obviously, it's one of the most obvious things that we need to do. And when we look globally at the moment, there is a disconnect around where the investment's going. But also from an ethnicity perspective, it's incredibly important that we really start to shine a light on these underrepresented founders. And one of the key ways that we're doing it at the moment is we're looking at the partners that we're working with as well. So when you ask the question, is it possible to go too quickly? I think the key thing that we need to do is make sure that there's a balance, that we are actually ensuring that our startup ecosystem reflects the world in which we live. And the closer we can get to that, the better it's going to be for the majority.
Will that not also require the investors also being a reflection of the world? Because right now it's very male dominated, which is why we have a lot of these issues. Andrew,
I was about to say, and to be honest, Courtney, I'm loving the fact that Courtney's on this call, because one of the key things I've noticed is as soon as we actually have representation within the VCs, we always see a far better investment portfolio. And I don't know your portfolio, Courtney, so I'm going to guess that actually, and I see this time and time again, that as soon as we actually start ensuring that there's a good balance, then that is then reflected in the portfolios. And we can't do anything about where we've come from. We can only do about where we are now and how we move forward. So maybe, Courtney, maybe I hand over to you, and I'd love to get your perspective as well.
Sure. I mean, 500 has certainly always had a focus on diverse investing ever since it began. And actually, the CEO of 500, Christine Tsai, was the first female venture capitalist I ever met when I came to the Valley to raise funding for one of my earlier startups back in 2011. So certainly, I think having that outlook from the beginning has made 500's investment portfolio more diverse, perhaps, than others. But certainly there needs to be much more intention and focus on not only gender diversity, but ethnic and racial diversity, as well as making sure that we're serving both abled and disabled populations as well. One of the things that 500 has done over the past year is implemented ESG processes that we're actually teaching our startups that we're investing in and asking them to have an awareness of the impact, certainly of the companies that they're building. A lot more to do, a lot more intention and focus needed, especially from investors, to ensure that diversity, equity, inclusion is achieved. But I'm happy that at least in the last few years, there's a general awareness, and I think that awareness is increasing. So I do hope that the next decade of investment and outcomes for our founders and society is much more equitable than what we've seen in the past.
Courtney, what advice would you give to other VCs? We've seen socially, politically, the words inclusivity, diversity becoming more and more important and part of the everyday vernacular. That might not necessarily be reflected in a lot of VC theses, perhaps. So you guys are doing well in terms of female representation. What advice would you give to other investors to try and become more inclusive and diverse?
Well, I think certainly, investors are an interesting set, right? You're primarily, you're beholden to your investment outcomes, but
I think for investors, it's important to just acknowledge the responsibility that we have in society and the ability that we have, the privilege that we have to be able to influence outcomes, not just in our own portfolio, but for founders around the world. So certainly the acknowledgement of our privilege and responsibility is required. I also think, however, that oftentimes within this conversation, the financial impact, the positive financial impact of having a diverse investment team and investing in diverse founders is overlooked. And you can look at 500's own portfolio as a representation of this. We've been investing, very diversely and broadly for over a decade now, and we have an excellent portfolio, from all around the world and across many different lines. So, even if you may not be familiar with diverse and equitable investing, certainly you can still have extremely positive outcomes, and I don't want that message to get lost.
Triska, do you mind if I just add in here? Because I think there's something, I almost feel bad for Courtney in the fact that it's like, how would you advise other VCs? It's like, no, we don't want to give away that secret because it's working really well for us. But there's a brilliant, there's someone I've been working with in the past. She wrote a book called Inclusion, and her name is Perrine Fark. And she's written this great insight into what's going on at the moment. And even as you were going through that, Courtney, I read, I make lots of notes in my books, but I found this. Inclusive organizations are twice more likely to exceed financial targets. And that was through Deloitte. And that 85% of CEOs whose companies have inclusive strategies say it's improved their bottom line. And that's from PwC CEO survey. The information, the data is all out there at the moment that backs up everything that Courtney was saying around commercial innovation, why we're here today. All of these things are impacted positively by having an inclusive strategy.
That's true. Salvatore, do you think the government plays a role in trying to implement, should it play a role in implementing these kind of strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so excited to hear this conversation and to have diversity and inclusion and equity being part of this conversation, because my degree is actually in culturally inclusive development. And when I did that at the time, I had to combine departments between economic development and sociology and psychology to form a degree like that, because those years ago, it wasn't a conversation that was happening enough. And we weren't thinking about development alongside of thinking about diversity and equity. And so it's very exciting to have this conversation, and also to have gone from that ivory tower of academia and thinking about this to now being in the real world with the government, seeing how we can do that. And definitely we have a role because we are the ones that are looking at supporting all of these different initiatives. And when we look at who are we supporting, we have to make sure that we are following all of the different types of diversity protocols that we can. And what we have done within that is at Audio, we have recently announced and launched our ESG policy and the value proposition that we provide to every company. And we're always making sure that within the companies that we're supporting, that we are ensuring systems and practices and an organizational culture that is put in place to support equal opportunities and recruitment and pay and working conditions. And specifically within the UAE, what's interesting about that is trying to find a balance between the competing priorities that we have on Emiratization, the small population of the UAE nationals, but also the need to remove barriers and to enable equal employment and educational opportunities for those that are disadvantaged, vulnerable, or coming from minority backgrounds. And the way that we can do that as a government is as we are giving out these incentives, as we are giving support, that we make sure that we are not just writing these policies, but making sure that we are allocating the right kind of support to all the different types of companies that will need that.
Okay. Andrew, I'm going to pose my last question to you. It's probably the most difficult one. What is the future of innovation?
It's so funny. I mean, what Salvatore again was saying earlier on about how excited he is every day to be in the role he's doing. And I am so lucky to be in the role that I'm doing, because if you'd asked me that question 3 years ago, it would be different. If you asked me the question 2 years ago, you asked me the question yesterday because of companies that I've actually been on calls with this morning. The future of innovation, ultimately, I don't think anyone could define it. I think it's more a case of saying, if we continue to innovate, we continue to give ourselves an opportunity to learn and grow. And I think underpinning that with curiosity not believing that we have all the answers, understanding the implications of what we're doing. But ultimately, the thing that we've spent the last sort of 10 minutes or so talking about, that inclusiveness, ensuring that innovation is done with an inclusive approach, I think ultimately is going to result in a phenomenal future for all of us.
That's fantastic and a lovely and lovely note to end on. Thank you to our panelists, and thanks for tuning in.